Welcome back to Archean, episode 9 of season 1 playthrough. And we're doing a little bit of initial crafting, get that going. So in this episode, I'm going to make another pass through the ore scanning code. It's pretty amazing how long coding can take sometimes. Maybe I'm just a slow coder. Night is about to fall in the game, so I was hoping to make the gold run before it got dark, but apparently that's not going to happen. So we'll put a bunch of lights on it and go for it when we're ready. Alright, so I'm kind of refactored this a little bit. In the wiki it's called velocity, so we'll just change that while we're at it. So the sort of things I want to support. I want to support toggle switch 1 for turning on the scanning on and off. I want toggle switch 2 for narrow or wide scanning. And then once we find something, I want to restart the scanning. Base display, the percentage we found, the direction, and then restart the scan again, because the assumption is while this is running, will be on the submarine or potentially be on a ground vehicle, and it will be moving around. So once you start moving around, then of course the values are no longer as useful. So I'm scanning through the code here, see what to change. So I guess the first thing I'll do is support narrow and wide. I'm just going to use W and N for narrow and wide to avoid getting too verbose on the constants here. So I think I'll do 30, plus and minus 30. And we'll leave it at 120 for the wide scanning. Although I may manually change that just initially, just before I get a general direction, and then return it back to 120 again. And updating some of the ore scanning state. So because we have two sets of scanning values, we need to now have what's the actual value in a working variable here. So we'll put those there. And then initially I set them in the init, but then later on I realized I don't have to do that, because I will check the toggle and then set them at the beginning of the tick, and so there's no reason to initialize them. Which I just kind of realized I don't need to do that there. I think I'm getting a little bit faster with the Xeon programming language. Yeah, programming, at least for me, to get better at, you just have to do it. Just make mistakes and just keep coding as you code and make mistakes, and the coding speed improves. Of course, I'm on episode 4 writing this code. So we're going to grab switch 1, and we're going to call that the scanning enable. I actually get this backwards. I debug it for a little bit and finally fix that. So basically, I want the default, like it's switched now, to indicate it's going to scan wide, and when I toggle it, it'll scan narrow. So if you look at line 72, should be obvious. Wasn't obvious to me initially, but now it is. So I'll debug that and figure that out and realize I made a boo-boo. Little copy pasting to try to cut down a little bit of typing. So it's wide. Now I'm going to muck with this code a little bit and rearrange it and rearrange it and rearrange it and rearrange it. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit. This is at 5x. I was going to use the if function, then I thought, well, that's going to make it a little too much. But then the other way was a little too long, so I went ahead and ended up using the if statement. So there's the if function. There's an if statement and there's an if function. So this is the if function, which means you have a condition, and if it's true, the second argument's used. If it's false, the third argument's used. So that makes it pretty compact in this case. And this way I don't need to have those variables up above this. I can do this local to the tick code, and that's what I want. So anything can be local within a tick, which means it's only used within a tick and no longer required. Definitely just put it in there. All right, so I'm going to start playing with it now. You see it's running and it's just spinning around. So one bug I have is controlling the pivot when the scanning's turned off. When scanning's turned off, the pivot, the scanner shouldn't be rotating because that consumes power. And then the other thing I'm playing around with is that the wide narrow is not working. It's backwards, and that's because I just had a mental lapse there in the conditional, and I said I finally figured that out and resolved that. So I'm kind of staring at this. Why is this working? So I'm going to speed this section of me staring at code at 5x since it's not too exciting. So I'm just trying to figure out why the narrow wide is not working the way I expect it to be. And so what I ended up doing is I said, well, let's add let's provide some state. I removed some dead code there. So I said, this doesn't make sense to me. Let me just write some stuff out, which is always useful. You can write stuff to the computer monitor, or you can print things out. And okay, so I don't understand what's going on with these switches. Am I just deranged here? The switches don't work anymore. This is probably the most fun part about coding, is when there's an obvious error that anyone else looking at it go, yeah, you made that mistake, but you stare at it and you stare at it and you stare at it and you just can't see it. And for me, typically, if I hit that condition, it's just okay. Just put some traces in there, and print out assumptions and go with that. And at some point, you're going to print something out, and you're going to backtrack it, and you go, oh, that's what's wrong. See, the switches work. They're in the off position. So I had crazy thoughts like maybe the switches are inverted. Maybe no, their switches are working correctly. They're wired correctly. I double check the cabling and make sure they're all cabled correctly. My last possibility is I made a dumb programming mistake. That's can't be that, right? It's too simple. It's just a simple switch. And so I'm looking at the other error I have, sort of ignoring the narrow wide issue. And the other issue is I have the scanning turned off and the pivot's still spinning around. So I need to turn that off. And so what I need to do is set the speed to 0. If it's turned off, turn the speed to 0. Well, I make some bugs in this too. I do fix these bugs. So all the bugs I've listed so far I will correct before the end of this episode. So we only want to rotate if we're enabled. So if we're enabled, and okay, so I was actually curious if this works. Sometimes I don't always understand when you can nest an expression, when you can't. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And so I figured I'd give it a shot. All right, so if the scanning is enabled, then use the scanning speed. Otherwise, use 0. Okay, it stopped. except that scanning speed is a positive number. And the actual true scanning speed could be negative or positive, which means depending on when I turn it off, when I turn it back on, it may do weird things. See, one of the weird issues with the pivot, when it's in velocity mode, you can't set it at a certain position, which I think is unfortunate. It'd be nice if, even with velocity mode, I wish that speed and velocity, or the angle in velocity, were separate channels. So you can always set it at a certain position or set the speed. But I can't do that, so I can't change where it's at. So that means if I turn it on, turn it off, I have to recover it, the position where the see it's bouncing like that. It's kind of doing this weird bounce, and now it's bouncing over there. And I'm okay. Now I got two problems. Now it's the wide narrow still not working, and now it does a funny little bounce when I turn it off, turn the scanning on, turn it on. And what happened is, if you look at the scanner direction, it's at 30.5. It got outside the range of narrow. And so it got confused. And because direction is wrong, it gets sort of locked up. Here's a perfect scenario of adding a feature and regressing the code. So I'm thinking, okay, let's that really should be scanning velocity. All right, we'll call it scanning speed. What we should do is we should keep track of the current speed and then reuse it when I turn it on and off. And that way we won't get in this bad state. So we'll just, we keep a copy of the speed. If we reset it to 0, because we toggle the scanning off, I toggle the scanning back on, I just reuse that variable and everything should be fine. So here we are, we output, instead of the constant, we always report this variable. And now in here, now since we're setting it in line 64, we're now setting it, so we don't have to set it here. And this one we invert. And then I make this, now I make another bug. So I go, well, I'm just changing from positive to negative, negative to positive, right? And that's true, except only if you have the correct state. So if you get out of sync, it won't work because you're inverting it incorrectly and it's bouncing. And so this technique will work if you initially are in a good state. Every time the scanner sweeps from one side to the other, you just have to invert the speed. But if you get in a position that we're in a bad location, you're outside the range, and so it can't recover because basically your initial speed is the wrong direction, and you can't like reset it back to 0. What I would like to do is, if you turn it off, I guess I could put that code in there, turn it off and reset it so it faces forward when you turn it off. And I can do that. That requires additional code because it's velocity and you have to sort of like try to get it to the center, but you're going to overshoot it and go back and forth and running a PID controller just to get to basically recreate a whole servo logic just to get it nailed. So we're not going to do all that. Anywho, so I realized that clever line of putting everything, that clever line of 71 is won't work. Here's also a suggestion: when you're writing code, write it in small chunks and test it as best you can in small chunks. And then if you regress code, you're close to that code to do that. This is turning out a lot more code than I thought it was going to be. Because could drive in the scanner. Now you could simplify this. I'm trying to actually just pick out a certain one. You just had it spin around and not worry about sweeping and all that. Make things a little easier. All right, so okay, we fixed our stutter, but we're still in narrow and wide are still backwards. So we're making progress. So we can turn it on and off now. At least it stops. And line 30 of the console is displaying the obvious. And then at this point I realized that, oh, I got them inverted, which is obvious. This should be called or scanning narrow, because it's turned off, which means narrow is off. When I turn it on, then narrow is turned on. So that means I have everything inverted, and just to change everything around, and that will fix that problem. All right, so now we got that problem fixed. And now it's out of control. And we're spinning out of control now. Oh, that's because I'm in the middle of changing the, so I broke something. Wonderful. Oh, it seems to be working. Okay, maybe just gotta sync. Okay, so now I'm gonna make a pass, kind of start at the top and kind of do a self-review, kind of look at stuff. And just make sure there's nothing weird in here. Self-reviews is always useful. Of course, once you do it too often, then you just, like I said, as I spaced out on that code, got it wrong. Okay, next problem we have. What I want to do is when we find effectively the nearest gold deposit, we want to lock onto that and effectively display that information on the screen and recycle the scanning, because the assumption is when it's turned on, we're moving around. Now I know you can use some people have used accelerometers, and so if you put it on a vehicle and the vehicle is moving, reset the scan, but the vehicle is like standing still, then you don't have to reset the scan because you're not moving, so nothing changes. But for a subs or ocean water vessels bounce around, so they're always moving. There's current, they're always moving somewhere or moving this and moving that. So that won't do any good. So you're always doing that. So there'll be a manual switch. Effectively what happens, the goal is first turn it on wide, and I can actually move the vehicle to scan other areas or change the values inside. And once I got something close, and then put it on narrow, point in that direction, put it on narrow, and just keep heading towards it. And as you get closer, it should lock in faster, and then of course recycle faster. So, which is what you want. As you get closer and closer, it should cycle faster and faster as far as giving you precise information. And so what I'm doing here, okay, so we found some more. Right now it's like you find anything. I could change it to say find at least 10% or something like that. Right now it's find something. I can just tweak that. And obviously if you want to have a lot of fun, you can write a cool UI and be able to change these things to UI settings and all that, but we're not going to do all that. And I make little bugs here and there. For example, line 90, I used the last distance, but last distance is really last base distance. It's not the, as because I'm enumerating the channels, I want to use the actual the channel I enumerated. So this is, if I manually turn off the scanning, then I want to reset the starting state. Now this is tricky because so one of the problems I ignored, which actually comes back to bite me, is if you reboot the computer, reboot this simulated computer, the first thing it does when it falls in tickets, it does a scan. It thinks that it was a previous scan, but it wasn't. So it basically will grab previous or information from the scanner and use it thinking it found something. I put some code in there to deal with that at the end of this video, but I think I might have to refine that a little bit. Probably make another pass. So this this past part 4 of writing this code, that'll be the last of this massive coding thing. And episode 10, I'll get back to working on the sub, and I'll bring this code over to the sub. I might tweak it a little bit, but at this point, I think it's going to be in the good enough. I mean, the goal's not that far away, and I think I spent way too much time on this already. So I think we're going to put this in the good enough category and go with that. And I think I'll let it cook for a while, then maybe sit back down and rewrite the whole thing from scratch. And try to make it a little pretty here. Because I think at the end of this episode, it's good enough to work, and it adds a few little gotchas, which I can fix without too much problems. I think that one glitch of it, remembering the old state, I think I can. I did a partial fix of that. I think I can do a better fix for that. There won't be that much code. But I'm gonna focus on the submarine on episode 10. I want to get going. It's getting dark. Now I gotta build spotlight so I can see the heck where I'm going. Get that gold pumping out. Because once I have gold, then I can make a navigation console. And once I have a navigation console, now I know my lat long. And you mix that with the ore scanner, and now you can actually plot the lat long coordinate of where the ore is at, which makes it nice. So now you can put and then you have autopilot in your naval vessel. You plot the lat long, say go here, ship, and let it drive exactly where you need to go. But you can't do that without a navigation unit, and you can't build out without gold. All right, see that distance 10 meters? And you go, wait a minute, you can't find gold. It's not 10 meters. And that's the problem where it remembers the old data. Because what happens is I hit the N, I found gold, I reset it by just changing the starting distance again. And then it does that pass, and it reads the data, and it goes, oh, look, you found gold. Because that was from the previous larger distance. And I have to sort of flush that out when changing distances. And so now I'm back to staring at code again. So what am I going to do here? Oh, and before I get to that, the other problem is you notice that I displayed in the print, you found like 4 different lines. That's because I need a break here. So basically when I find, because I'm in a repeat loop. So once you find something, break out repeat loop. So let's deal with that. I can spell break. Break is right. I keep, yeah. I'm typically code in C++. Want to put those semicolons in there. All right. And the other thing is I'm not computing the distance correctly. I'm using the base distance instead of the actual distance. And that's, my fault. I should have named it more descriptive. I should have called it or last base distance. And I think that would have avoided this error if I would have. I'm looking for the other code that does the same thing just to verify. Delta. I could put that in a function too, I guess. Right, so yeah, so that fixed the distance. I was thinking that because I saw that 10, I looked at the distant code, so it's not the same bug. Oh, and I put a typo in when I changed the print here, so I get bogus data for that. So I'll have to debug that. I was just thinking that coding while recording your coding is like coding while somebody watching over your shoulder. At least for me, it's kind of distracting. Right. So what I decided to do to solve there's old data in the scanner channel is to have a skip count. And if the skip count is greater than 0, then don't do this code. So if the skip count is non-zero, subtract 1 from the code, from the variable. Let's just make it obvious. It's not required, but I just want to make it obvious. And then let's move those over. So basically, in the skip routine. Now I can also do this on, what I also should do is that I should, in the init function, when I first create the variable, I should set it to like 2, and that would solve the startup problem of reading old data because it will skip this. So that would be a simple change. But so what happens when I find something, I'll set the skip, and then when it comes around, it won't read the data, but it continues to set the channels. And so that means when it skips reading, it's really skip, scan, skip, or scan, read, skip. Probably a better name for that. All right, so now we're just going to watch it. All right, so boom, we found something, and we've started to scan. We don't have any weird stuff in the print, in the console output. We don't have anything weird on the console. Probably had too many numbers in the in the debug print. Direction and distance have the same value. That's a typo in the print statement, but it's correct on the console. And I'll spend some time screwing around with that. So effectively, the coding part of this video is done with. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to fix the print statement, which is a simple typo. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scan speed to really, really slow, and just kind of look at it scanning, doing a deep scan around. And I think I might hack in the wide value to make it scan really far. And this is running at 5x right now. So now you see how it's going really slow. It's running at 5x video playback, and I made it really slow. Just curious, just to see what happens. I'm curious if it finds something. I made the range, the scan arc much larger. And I'm curious if there may be some gold really close I'm just missing because the increments are too high, or the scan range is not, or the arc is not large enough. So you're just letting it cook at this point. But there's no more additional coding part in here. I'm just going to, if you want to sit here and watch it spin around or jump out of the video, said the next video will be working on the submarine, apparently in the dark. I'll probably see if I can't put some lights up off the main base to light things up a little bit. All right, until next time, see ya.